Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Alexander. I'm a principal consultant at SIT Solutions, and I'm in charge of the GRC program. With us today, we have Leo, who is a senior consultant at SIT Solutions, and Michael Seaman, who is the VP of Infrastructure, IT, and Security. Did I get that right, Michael?
Yes.
At Scopus Financial.
Scopus Financial, that's correct.
Very good. So today we're here to talk about getting prepared for a GRC assessment. Do we want to discuss what exactly you had assessed, Michael? Like the scope of the assessment? Like
yeah, we can briefly touch on that. Sure. So Scopus Financial, as the name gave it away, is a company that works in the financial services sector of critical infrastructure, and we are a technology company, so fintech. We have a portion of our company that provides services to third parties. And as part of those services, we have criteria and expectations to meet. And so our primary focus of this risk assessment and this GRC review was around those services that we're offering third party and independent of our annual reviews and our other auditing requirements.
All right, very good. So that actually covers one of the first questions I had. I wanted to know what were the motivating factors for engaging on having the assessment performed in the first place. So you kind of covered that. One of the follow-up questions for that for me is, did you have a process of establishing specific goals for the assessment?
So we had a loose process. This is the first time that I went through this process with Scopus, and there were several factors that influenced this. One, there was a known need. We had an idea and a goal of what we wanted to accomplish, and it was much broader than what we were required to accomplish. So we definitely focused on our requirements, contractual obligations, and then meeting our SOC compliance requirements. But to us, that focus wasn't intrinsic enough to determine additional value add through technology enhancement, policy enhancement, and other robustness that we could do to our cybersecurity posture. So we wanted to expand that breadth of the review and cover more items than just what was recovered or what was covered in the initial review in the third-party audits that we go through. So we took advantage of this opportunity to expand upon that and not only meet the requirements for the SOC reviews and the SOC audit certification, but to take that a little bit further and just say, what else are we doing that's good? What else are we doing that's bad? And not so much that we didn't know, but so much that we wanted a third party report on that would not influence our audit, that we could take and show that to the company that these are things that are important. We have an independent third party review of this. This is a foundation of value add and budgetary ask so that we can solve these problems and add to these programs.
Oh, that makes sense. So it sounds like you were looking to set, I guess you could say, a baseline from which to measure future endeavors, right?
Very much so,
regard
yes.
to security. Okay.
Yes.
And also that you were addressing, you said you had known problems that you were looking to address, right?
Yes.
So with that being said, what factors went into selecting the particular, so I understand you were reviewing based on the NIST CSF, right? What influenced your selection of that specific framework to proceed with the review versus any others, for example?
Right. So our selection of the framework baseline that we chose for this go round focused on several factors. One being simplicity, two being coverage of necessary, and three being positions for scalability up and out. So getting us ready to grow.
Okay.
The company's been around for a little over a decade. We've got some policy and some practices and some procedure that stands on ISO standards. We've got a little bit of NIST. I come from a healthcare background, so there's all sorts of influences there. We really wanted to get rid of the hodgepodge and align on one set that would make sense, cover all of our existing needs, and put us in a great position to leap forward into what the next steps are to expand our auditing abilities. And CFS just fit that bill.
So you're saying that's probably a good advice you'd give to others with regard.
I think CSF is a great, yes, it's a great starting point. It's not the simplest. It is a very robust framework. It's easy to follow, but it's also easy to add on to. So if there's parts that you need to scale out to an 853 or to an ISO standard, you could add those on in small components without really affecting your whole baseline framework that you're using. So that gave us a good foundation to build on without locking us into anything or nor restricting us. Yeah.
Right. I see it as it's robust, but it's also generic in a sense, and it crosswalks pretty easily to most other standards.
It does, and it's heavily published. The crosswalks are there. It's easy to look at other standards and other implementations and see where the cross references are. So it's really easy to tailor answers or positions if you have a need to tailor certain areas to one standard, but not necessarily that need in others. So for us, there's certain things where having an ISO perspective have value and have appreciation, where that's not a necessity for us. So other areas of the framework, we didn't need to tailor or go that specific or go that direct on.
Okay, that makes sense. But at the same time, you can use the controls that are in CSF without crosswalking them to gain some satisfaction as to where you are at in general, right?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. Aside from obviously yourself, did you have challenges with getting any of the other business leadership or any other stakeholders on board with the process of getting this done?
I wouldn't say it was a challenge, but there's conversations that have to be had. I had support from my compliance team, from my executive committee, definitely the CIO. There's an appreciation for this from the rest of the board and the executive committee, but not necessarily always a full understanding. So having those conversations to onboard the value and adding breadth to an environment or an assessment like this, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but you have to have those conversations. You have to have that understanding.
So like level setting, in other words, I guess.
Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. Obviously, you selected Set Solutions in the end, but I'm wondering what factors went into your selection of a vendor partner to work with.
So this one turned out to be a lot more than we initially set off with. So my factors for judging the proposals were pretty simple when we came forward. And I guess ultimately they're still fairly simple. What we came back with after looking at several proposals was Set Solutions had the entire story. You had the beginning, you had the conclusion, you had the groundwork, and the expertise and understanding there was addressed in the first 2 minutes of the call, the initial scope call. The confidence was there that Set Solutions was the right team to do this for us. And while there's lots of skill sets out there, lots of other companies that offer these services, there were gaps in everyone else's proposals. And not to say that gaps don't exist in every proposal, but say that those gaps that we saw were addressed by Set Solutions proposal. Their framework for addressing the GRC assessment was very solid, and it's obviously worked. The timeline was put out there. Everything had the right amount of follow through. The expectations were met. We got exactly what we thought we would, and we're pretty happy with those results.
No, I'm glad to hear that. I wasn't trying to lead you to giving us an advertisement for Set Solutions, but yeah, more broadly though, I wondered if even before you had completed that selection, did you have any particular criteria that you were looking at to kind of drive the process?
So we had a little bit of criteria, and like I said at the beginning, this started off as a very simple approach, and I found that what I thought was a simple approach led to a very diverse set of ways to address it. And what I mean by that is I had a criteria of I have known knowns and unknown unknowns and everything in between, and I like to formalize and document this and create a roadmap from an independent third party so I can have more value as being presented to our company rather than something within. And so I wanted to focus on that. And in reviewing all the proposals to get this done, I realized that everybody addresses this completely differently. And so I came from a very broad expectation. I didn't have anything in particular. I didn't have a minutia set. I had some very general expectations, and that's what I set to meet. A lot of the process evolved and became more detailed as we continued conversations with different partners to go through this risk assessment process.
Okay, glad to hear it. So would you, I guess, would you offer others who are looking for this type of an assessment any specific advice on an approach to that? Because it sounds like you definitely did your homework, right? It sounds like you went through a lot to come up with the appropriate criteria. Do you have advice for anybody who's
I
been voting
do.
on
I
this?
do have some solid advice that I recommend taking this up. Everybody has or should have really beautiful sales slides. And if the conversation stops after the fifth slide and a free coffee mug, there's a problem.
Right.
And lots of conversations stop there. When I looked for examples of work, I asked for sample finding letters, sample results, sample methodologies. I looked for basically frameworks within this assessment. And what I mean by that is how does each company address this? What are the steps you take? What is the next step you take? What do you mark this as complete? What do you consider? And when you compare those granular steps, the details of the work being done, you can easily separate the value of a sales slide with the value of the implementation, and they are completely different.
Right. Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from on that. We evaluate a lot of mostly product and service vendors, but we evaluate a lot of them, and I hear exactly what you're saying on that.
Can you tell us, or the audience as well, going forward after you had the assessment, based on the outcome, and what was the expectation of the board and your CEO, CIO, and what came after that? What was the experience?
Well, that's where the work came in, and that's where the experience is definitely happening now. So now that we got a deliverable report, we have to translate that to a pathway to excellence. We have to translate that to work. So we're able to take the results, the recommendations, and we're able to prioritize them. And from there, we're creating, I think I'm up to about 29 different pathways of remediation for several findings. And we're able to prioritize those and then assign value to the business. So which one affects money, which one affects maturity, which one affects posture. And then we can address those and prioritize those. A lot of our processes, we needed to make more formal. So when we're looking at that, we have to look at, well, what's the value of a formal process in an area that is audited versus is not? So a service area versus an internal area. And so this lays the groundwork for doing that. If you just take the report and say thank you and save it off somewhere in your email, it doesn't do any good. Really, this was a 2.5 month engagement to give us 9 months worth of homework to do, so that we're in a better position to do this next year. And it's really the experience that we're having now is taking the findings, taking the report, and creating plan of actions around that, and then engaging the right internal teams and external partners that we need to bring on board to provide the solutions that were recommended or that we feel is necessary.
Sounds like we ought to have a follow-up, basically a part 2 of this next year after you go through this process again, right?
We'll see. Yes. Maybe in a few months we have another scope of work coming.
Oh, okay. I really meant for when you do the follow-up review on next year's round of assessment. But yeah, well, either way, we'll look forward to it. So my last question, well, it's a little bit complex, but my last question that I had was around any challenges that you might have encountered. And I'm wondering if you ran into any unexpected challenges. And I mean, I guess if there were expected challenges, that would be good to note too, but particularly in defining the statement of work, before, like either working with us or figuring out what the scope of it was going to be from your perspective. And also in defining that's like refining that scope when after we've kicked off the project.
Right. So there was a little bit of a challenge to that process. The GRC aspect, not so much as some of the other aspects that we did, because we knew coming in, we had a general idea that we were mature in some areas and immature in others. And we had a pretty good understanding of that. So the idea was to throw out a fishing net and see what we caught and see if there was anything that we missed. So we didn't really want to be too narrow or too broad. And I think we captured that really well. And I think we governed that. I think being the initial time that we did this particular assessment, we did that well. I believe the follow-up would be a little more precise. One, to check the remediation steps to make sure that those were done accurately and well. And then the next part is to focus on different avenues of the business specifically. So a particular part of the business that may be more stringent or maybe more vulnerable or more exposed or could be newer. Those would require a more defined scope of material scope of work to really dive into and just divulge what could be wrong there or what is probably right as well. It's a combination of the two. So for this component, just to summarize, it wasn't too much of a challenge this time because we wanted it to be broad, and we knew that we could just catch a bunch of things and put us in the right direction. I think the trick going forward for certain companies looking to do this would be, do you have a broad goal or do you have a narrow goal? And do you want to use this as an avenue or a roadmap to take your program to a higher maturity level? Or do you want to focus on a particular vulnerability that is being exposed through third-party integrations or is being audited or is raising awareness from a cyber insurance program? And those would be different scopes that you would want to definitely itemize and really target the detail. And even if that detail is unknown, just highlight it so the GRC assessment team can use their experience to expose or find whatever needs to be dealt with in that particular area, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So now that you have an assessment completed and you're working on remediation, do you find that now that as you provide services to other companies, that these companies are coming to you asking if you have this assessment done, and are you now that you have an assessment done, is this useful for you to present to them?
Definitely, and we've done this before in the past. Never on this breadth of a level. I really wanted to look at everything from a generic position. So we've had risk assessments performed regularly throughout our 10 years as a company, and they are used as evidence regularly. We do find that partnerships with larger firms, they require this. Any firm that requires any level of licensure or SOC compliance will want to see this type of thing, and more attestations are no longer as valuable as they used to be, particularly in insurance and other statements of basically security posture. And having a third-party document that affirms this is beneficial and is a resource that we use. Now, the offset of that would be whenever you're in a particular situation where you're being asked to show evidence for something and you have such a broad risk assessment, there is value in not providing a book, but providing a chapter or a paragraph. So that is also something to keep in mind as a company is doing this. There may be an internal goal of having a broad capture so that you can mature your entire position and posture as a company, whereas you may want something more granular or acute to expose or to release to certain partners or integrators or vendors or insurance people, et cetera.
So Michael Seaman from Scopus Financial, thank you very much for joining us today. Leo, thanks for coming and helping with this question and answer session. And hopefully this will give insight to people looking to do risk assessments or GRC assessments in their companies. Again, thanks and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thank you.